Deep within the heart of the enchanted wood, where the golden sunlight barely touched the ground and whispers of ancient magic echoed through the trees, there lived a young fairy named Alara. Unlike the other fairies, who were raised in loving homes with elder fairies to guide them, Alara had no family. She was an orphan. No one knew where she had come from. She had been found as a tiny, shivering bundle beneath the roots of the oldest tree in fairyland. The elder fairies took her in, but none claimed her as their own. In fairyland, every young fairy was assigned a mentor to teach them the ways of magic, the art of flying, and the wisdom of their ancestors. But Alara had no mentor. She had no one. She lived in the Hollow Glen, a place where fairies who did not fit into the usual fairy society resided. These were the outcasts, the ones born with magic that did not sparkle as bright, the ones who were different. Alara's wings were smaller than most, her magic was weaker, and she could never quite keep up with the other fairies in flight school. Yet, despite everything, she never gave up. Every morning, she woke up before the sun rose, climbed to the highest branch of the willow tree where she made her home, and practiced flapping her delicate wings. She whispered spells to herself, hoping that one day, her magic would be strong enough to prove she belonged. But the other fairies never let her forget what she was. "You'll never be like us, Alara," sneered Lyria, the most talented fairy in the kingdom. "You don't even know where you came from. Maybe you were never meant to be a fairy at all." Her words stung worse than a thorn scratch, but Alara refused to cry. She simply clenched her fists and promised herself that one day, she would find her place in the world. One evening, after an exhausting day of failing at spell practice, Alara sat beneath the glowing mushrooms near the elder tree. She watched as the other fairies giggled and danced in the air, their wings shimmering like diamonds. "I need to know who I am," she whispered to herself. "I need to know where I came from." There was only one place in fairyland that might hold the answers, the Forbidden Library. It was hidden deep within the misty caverns, a place no fairy was allowed to enter without permission from the High Council. Legends whispered that the library contained secrets that could change the very balance of fairyland. That night, when the moon hung high in the sky, Alara wrapped herself in a cloak made of woven starlight and set off toward the misty caverns. The journey was treacherous. Strange whispers followed her through the dark, twisting tunnels, and the shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking. Finally, after what felt like hours, she reached the grand doors of the Forbidden Library. They were carved from pure obsidian, ancient symbols glowing faintly across the surface. Taking a deep breath, Alara placed her hand against the door. The moment her fingers touched the cold stone, the doors creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of old parchment and dust. Shelves upon shelves of ancient scrolls lined the cavern walls, stretching as far as the eye could see. At the center of the room stood a single pedestal, and on it lay an old, leather-bound book. The title read, "The Lost Fairy Bloodlines." Heart pounding, Alara flipped through the pages. Her fingers trembled as she stopped at a section labeled "The Orphan One." It described a fairy who had been born under the cursed blood moon, a fairy whose magic was different, unpredictable. A fairy who had been abandoned because her power was feared. Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she read the final words on the page. She alone holds the key to the fate of fairyland. Alara barely slept that night. The words from the book echoed in her mind. What did it mean? Why was she so important? Determined to find answers, she spent the next few weeks secretly practicing new spells she had read about in the library. Unlike the structured magic taught in fairyland, these spells were ancient, wild, and untamed. And to her surprise, they worked. For the first time in her life, magic flowed naturally through her veins. She could make flowers bloom in an instant, summon gusts of wind with a flick of her wrist, and even hear the whispers of the stars. But her newfound power did not go unnoticed. One evening, as she was practicing near the glowing lake, a deep, commanding voice echoed through the air. "You have broken the laws of fairyland, Alara." She turned to see the High Council standing behind her, their eyes filled with disapproval. Lyria smirked beside them. "I told you she was dangerous," Lyria said. "She's been practicing forbidden magic." Alara's heart pounded. "I had to know who I was," she pleaded. "I had to know why I was abandoned." The oldest council member, a wise fairy named Elder Thelios, stepped forward. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "It is time you learn the truth, child." Alara was taken to the grand hall, where only the most important matters were discussed. The council members sat in a circle, their wings shimmering under the golden light. "Your parents were once the greatest fairies in fairyland," Elder Thelios began. Your mother was the guardian of the moon, and your father was the keeper of the stars. But on the night of your birth, a terrible prophecy was spoken. It was said that a child born under the blood moon would have magic so powerful it could either save fairyland, or destroy it. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat. So they abandoned me. They feared what you might become, the Leos admitted. But they were wrong to do so. You have spent your whole life struggling, trying to find your place. And yet, you have never once used your power for harm. Lyria stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. You can't trust her. She's dangerous. Elder Thelios raised a hand. No, Lyria, it is not Alara we should fear, it is our own mistakes. For the first time in her life, Alara was not seen as an outsider. She was not weak. She was not worthless. She was powerful. Over the next few months, she trained with the High Council, learning how to control her magic. She became stronger, wiser. Then, one fateful night, a dark force threatened fairyland. A shadowy creature known as the Devourer emerged from the abyss, seeking to consume all magic. The fairies fought bravely, but they were no match for the creature. One by one, they fell. Then Alara stepped forward, summoning all the power within her. She unleashed a spell so radiant that the entire sky lit up like the dawn. The Devourer shrieked and vanished into nothingness. Fairyland was saved. From that day on, Alara was no longer the orphan, no longer the outcast. She was Alara, guardian of fairyland, and the fairy who had once been forgotten became the most legendary of them all.